In 1867, a young boy was born in Richland Center, Wisconsin, which is the start of the driftlift area of Wisconsin, where the land undulates along the Wisconsin River. That area, mostly agrarian back post-Civil War, raised a child with a father as a minister, who ultimately becomes a young mind interested in architecture. His parents send him off to University of Wisconsin as a freshman in engineering. After one semester, he fails out of the university system, and soon after begins his career as an architect, working for the architect locally, Joseph Silsby, in the arts and crafts movement. In his late teens, he leaves for Chicago and works for many important architects, least of which is Louis Sullivan. He eventually opens up his first firm in the Chicago area, in Oak Park, where working with Sullivan, he's also working with his local residential clients on houses and house additions. After a decade, he returns to the land of Wisconsin, and I've sketched here a little bit in the rolling hills, and has already established a language of the modern movement before the modern movement. He starts to deal with Japanese influence in terms of planes and space. So if you imagine set inside the landscape, a series of planes which move in 3 dimensions across the valley. We see a culmination after a 10-year period of the early language of the modern movement established here in central Wisconsin. Long before the actual language is established in Europe and eventually coined the modern movement. These planes in a triaxial axis of X, Y, and Z in the language of the architect are about a contemporary idea to stitch the woven nature of human habitation as part of the landscape as if it's organic. So the home here, the nature of it, is of the hill, and not on the hill. So much like the trees themselves, which are part of the landscape, the architecture is perceived to be organic and part of the landscape as well. Of course, by now you've surmised that the architect we're speaking of is Frank Lloyd Wright, and the seminar will be on Frank Lloyd Wright's career, which culminated just recently in the definition of Wright as a World Heritage Architect. So the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, deemed his work to be significant enough that it has to be protected in perpetuity as a global heritage site. Not just American, not Midwest, but a cherished piece of art and architecture of the 20th century for the world to appreciate. So it's our goal in the course of our spring semester with Wright to understand why and how this accomplishment came to the central part of Wisconsin. So Taliesin, the name of his home and studio that he built in 1911 after his first Prairie Revolution, sits of the hill as a shining brow, which is the Welsh word Taliesin. So rather than being on top of the head proper, it's stitched into the hill and floats out as this composition of plains and space. Wright went on to build over 500 buildings through over 1,000 projects. Working extensively in the Midwest and eventually in his second home at Taliesin West in the desert in Arizona. Wright has created a legacy of modernism, and the articulation of the modernism here, the spectacle, is that he devises this system 10 years before the modern movement was born. And so we need to investigate, how is that possible? What's the language of that? And his sources to develop this iconic language of a new type of modern spirit in the plains of Midwestern America. For 26 years, we've sent UW-SARUP students out to Taliesin in the summer months to draw this down to the eighth of an inch, the Library of Congress Historic American Building Survey. Currently, students are working on modeling Taliesin to an eighth-inch scale. So what we see here is a demonstration product of the birdwalk, which projects out here in the sketch to the southeast. When Wright designed that in 1953 for his third wife, Olga Vanna, so she could go out and be closer to the birds and their trees out in the valley. And so we're still engaged in the future of Taliesin as a UNESCO site, as it's one of 8. And you'll be studying some of the other major monuments you've seen before in history classes, such as the Roby House from 1906, the Guggenheim Museum in New York from the 30s on to the 1950s, and Union Temple from 1904 in Oak Park. These 3, along with Taliesin and 4 others, are part of those 8 homes and ecclesiastical structures that Wright designed in the 20th century, which are now again part of the UNESCO site, are claimed part of global heritage. So join me in the spring for a semester online, your choice whether you'd like to take it via synchronized lectures, Tuesdays at 5:40 to 7 o'clock, or asynchronous, where you'll find the bulk of all the videos then from that day, as well as those in storage online, so you can work at your own pace. Frank Lloyd Wright, born in 1867, died in 1959. At the age of 91, most people are retired and living on a vacation site. Wright had 162 projects on the drafting table, as he was busy at the end of his career as much as he was towards the beginning. A young man from post-Civil War Richland Center, acclaiming the site of global heritage for the state of Wisconsin. See you next semester.